And good morning. Welcome to Up North News Radio for this Wednesday, April 10th. I'm Pat Kreitlow here on Lake Wissota. Greg Bach will be along from Waukesha in a bit. Melissa Kay will chime in from Wisconsin Rapids. We'll talk to Melissa Baldoff for today's climate check. We'll get a forecast from meteorologist Brittany Merlot. We'll visit with Todd Alba and more. We've got a live visit with Congressman Mark Pocan about things happening in the nation's capital. And then we'll play an interview that I recorded last night or night before last with retired D.C. police officer Michael Fanone, one of the police officers who was brutally assaulted during the insurrection of January 6th. And he's in Wisconsin this week on a speaking tour, basically telling people to take it down a notch, especially with the violent rhetoric, because in some people it does lead to violence, like the kind that left him beaten and near death. So we'll have that interview as well. Plus, the Bucks have a new big-time worry as Giannis goes down last night, and the Brewers chalk up a victory in Cincinnati. All this and much more ahead on Up North News Radio, starting at 6:06. If you're watching on video playback, you can run this ahead 4 minutes, and we'll see you soon. Right, all right. Show titles are in. All right, here we go.
All across Wisconsin from Civic Media, this is Up North News Radio. Now, live from our Lake Minnesota studio, here's the founding editor of Up North News, Pat Brightlow.
Well, hey there, Wisconsin. Good morning. It is 6:06 on this Wednesday morning, April 10th, 2024. It is another beautiful day to have you here up north, live from Lake Minnesota, from wherever you're listening, across the Civic Media Radio Network or through the Civic Media app. If you're joining us by podcast or on social media, checking out the video feed, we are glad you're here. I've got a question for you. If you're listening to us live, are you looking to the east and noticing there's this little bit of brightness out there? You can actually see things outside. Our long slide back into early morning daylight is progressing very nicely, thank you, and it's making things a little easier for those of us who are all on the early shift. If you'd like to reach us today, our phone number is 855-75-CIVIC. Be sure to use that if you'd like to text us a message as well, or better yet, use the Civic Media app and text us a message. You can email us. You can post comments on social media. We'd love to hear back from you on the things that we're talking about today. So, you ask, what are we talking about today? Well, in our climate check report coming up in less than 30 minutes, we talked to Melissa Baldoff about some tough transitions. It's one thing to say that you want to, stop, say, getting your electricity from coal and that you want to get it from renewable sources. But if you're not ready to make that leap yet all the way, but you don't want your coal plant operating anymore, that leaves you with some options like, say, a natural gas generation for your power plant. But again, it's cleaner than coal, but it's not quite renewable. There are some communities that are wrestling with this transition, and we'll talk to Melissa about that. We will hear from State Senator Kelda Roys about Governor Tony Evers yesterday calling the legislature's Joint Finance Committee into special session. Now, Republicans have pretty much ignored every other request from the governor for a special session. This one's just for the Joint Finance Committee because they're the ones holding up $125 million to clean up PFAS contamination. And so we'll have the latest on that showdown coming up in just a couple of minutes here. In our second hour, we are going to talk to retired D.C. police officer Michael Fanone. He was one of the many law enforcement officers attacked and badly beaten by a mob during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He's in Wisconsin this week on a speaking tour, warning of the dangers of embracing violent political rhetoric, words that can motivate others to engage in violence. And Congressman Mark Pocan will join us live around 7:30 with an update on the ongoing saga of the Republican soap opera that is delaying aid to Ukraine and Israel and taking care of other high priorities here at home. So we got a lot coming up today. Let's check out some of the temperatures at 6 a.m. around the state in all of these places with fine Civic Media radio stations. It's 39 degrees here on Lake Wissota, home of 93.5 The Tap. Hayward is at 30 degrees, Park Falls 32. In Wausau, where you're listening to Bull Falls Radio, it's 37 degrees right now. Green Bay's at 45. Listeners to the Eagle in La Crosse are at 44 degrees. Wisconsin Rapids 42. Oshkosh 45. Madison 43. And in the sleepy little hamlet outside of Milwaukee, known as Waukesha, Wisconsin, it's 43 degrees, where we also find Greg Bach standing by with, is that a Brewers playoff t-shirt from years gone by? It is. What year is that? I can't read your stomach.
It's like 21.
That. 2021. All right.
2021. I wanted to try something new though, Pat. Can I try something new?
Yes.
Hit it. I want intro music now. And I'm in control, so I get intro music.
you want walk-up music.
All right, that's it. Just wanted to try that.
I like the initiative. I do. I like.
Didn't realize there was an intro into that intro music.
I mean, you're literally tooting your own horn there by bringing up the brass section to bring you in. So,
How you
Good
doing,
work.
Pat?
I'm fine. So who was that we were hearing?
That's the intro music for John Cena. He's a very popular wrestler,
Oh, yes.
actor.
Mm-hmm.
You hate on wrestling, but
But I really like him. I like him. I like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. I just never saw them in their wrestling days.
Good stuff.
Yes, for those who appreciate it, absolutely. I just like that. They clearly got the deal of how much of this is acting and to be a character, and that they were able to take those skills then and go mainstream with them.
Yeah.
I think is very cool. Now, I'm not going to get into comments The Rock made over the weekend about politics because I don't have it in front of me and I don't want to misspeak. But again, from an acting standpoint, I've really enjoyed watching them. It's good. So you picked some good walk-up music there because you're a bit of a character yourself.
Oh, I thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know what you're talking about, Pat. I don't know what you're talking about.
Not even in the least. Of course not. It's 6:12 right now. I'm gonna hit sports a little bit early just because there's a bit of a concern, and I don't know, Greg, if you saw the video.
Yeah, I just heard about it actually.
Giannis going down on his own. It wasn't a collision or anything like that. He was starting to jog back up the court and just crumpled. And the Bucks did snap their 4-game losing streak, but their 2-time MVP is hurt. Giannis, at the very least, strained his left calf in the third quarter of the Bucks' 104-91 victory over the Boston Celtics. But Doc Rivers says that Giannis Antetokounmpo was undergoing an MRI on his calf, and he would have his Achilles tendon tested today. God, I hope it's not the Achilles, because that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even, the injuries that can happen playing those sports and just like, it's not so much like you said, like he didn't collide. It wasn't a thing.
Nope.
Just when your body says, nope,
I'm done with this. And
I just don't, oh my good gravy.
I thought, well, maybe it's just cramps. Maybe it's some kind of a strain. Again, there's only a couple of games left in the regular season, then come to playoffs, and without Giannis, I don't like our odds as much.
I mean, I was happy to see him beat the Celtics. That was a pretty good. I know I don't know much about basketball, but I do know that we need to beat the Celtics every chance we can get.
Yes, and that was good because again, we're looking at seeding for the playoffs, and Boston is way up there in the seeding right now. So anytime you can kind of crack the code and figure out how to beat them, it's a good thing. Here was the weird thing about the game last night.
Okay,
there were so few fouls that the Boston Celtics became the first team in NBA history to not shoot a single free throw. And the Bucks themselves only shot 2 free throws.
In the entire game?
In the entire game. In NBA history, there's never been a case where there were so few fouls that teams didn't go to the line and shoot free throws. Isn't that
very
weird?
Interesting. That's some clean playing or some sleeping refs.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to go with the clean playing just because, again, both of these teams, I don't want to say they were sleepwalking, but they're both clearly in the playoffs. So they're just kind of staying tuned up and didn't go at it really hard. Clearly, it's almost like it was almost like, say, an NBA All-Star game where there is no defense. Yeah, it was kind of along those lines.
Giannis Antetokounmpo went for 325 points tonight.
I shouldn't laugh because that's still very possible that one of these years it could happen. The Bucks do have their final regular season home game tonight versus Orlando. Then they're at Oklahoma City Friday night. They're at Orlando on Sunday afternoon. Catch tonight's game starting at 6:30 on Lake Air in Amory and locally grown radio in Wisconsin Rapids. Meanwhile, for the Brewers, Christian Yelich, he's getting off to a good start.
I know, and I was saying that before opening day because it's like you're now with Jackson Chourio being the new hot commodity there. It was like we were in like 2018 with Christian Yelich and Ryan Braun.
Exactly.
And I was asking the question, is Christian dealing with the idea of becoming I use the term with all the respect, the elder statesman of the team? Yeah.
Or does he go the Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre route?
Yeah. And his injury, even though it was years ago, I felt like he was still hampered by that ankle injury. But man, good. Yes, this is exactly. I want Christian Yelich to have like a dynamite season.
And he's having a good start. He drove in 3 runs. Blake Perkins drove in 3 runs, helping Joe Ross and the Brewers beat Cincinnati 9-5 last night. Perkins and Sal Frelick each had 3 hits. Milwaukee had 13 overall. Jake Bauers had 2 RBIs. Ross earned his first big league win since June of 2021 when he was with the Washington Nationals, because Ross has been recovering from his second Tommy John surgery that he had in June of 2022. So almost 2 years later, he's back. So good on Russ. Yeah.
Good bats happening right now.
Very much so. On the downside, pitcher Devin Williams still having back issues. He was transferred to the 60-day injured list. Brewers lefty Wade Miley will make his first start of the season this evening in Cincinnati. And then the Brewers have a noontime game tomorrow to wrap up the series in Cincinnati and head out to Baltimore. This evening's game, the broadcast starts at 5:05 on News from the Center in Richland Center, WRGN in Racine, Oshkosh Air Support, and 98Q Country in Park Falls. So we're going to see Luke Mathers tomorrow, right?
Correct.
Because tonight is Top Chef night.
Yes, so that's what I will just I'll bring them. I'll tell you what tomorrow I'll bring the music up for that segment, and then I'll just take a nap.
Why? Do you not want to hear about the chef testants?
He sent me a message yesterday, and he goes, "The disdain in your face" while we were talking.
I believe that Chef Testance is to you what Paul McCartney's Wonderful Christmas Time is to me. It's triggering, is what it is.
It just is. Dr. Larley's put it best. She's like, sounds like something you go to the doctor for. I need to get my Chef Testance checked.
Yes, but they will be competing tonight on Top Chef. We'll talk to Luke, and then I was tying that into the Brewers because he knows I've been working him hard for Yacht Rock Night, which would be July 26th.
Oh, we should make this a thing.
We need to make this a thing. There are enough Civic Media tickets, I believe, that we could do something not just for ourselves, but maybe bring a few listeners along. And we need to come up with some kind of a contest for the tickets, and obviously with a Yacht Rock theme. So
is it a giveaway, or is it?
It is. You get a captain's hat.
But do you have to buy the special ticket to get the cab set, or is it just they give them out the door?
They're just giving them out at the door.
Awesome.
Yes. So there. We need a contest idea. Just looking to see if there's anything else there. Nope. Presented by Wintrust, Wisconsin's bank, and it's nice little. It's like something right out of Caddyshack. So we'll have to plan toward that. All right. The latest on Governor Evers calling Republicans back into session, fighting over PFAS contamination. How is this still a thing? Live from Lake Wissota, this is Up North News Radio on the Civic Media Radio Network. Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats has a birthday today, and he's in senior citizen territory, turning 65 years old today. We'll have that and more coming up in today's history lesson about a half hour from now. Well, we've heard several times since Governor Tony Evers assumed office with a Republican-led legislature that he would call the legislature into session for some important issues to say, hey guys, this is an important issue. Why don't we set all the politics aside and why don't we try to work out something together? Republican legislators have responded with words that are not suitable for radio. And rather than coming in to debate and compromise and reach agreement, they have done the procedural equivalent of thumbing their nose or offering up a middle finger, coming into session, just a couple of them, to gavel it in, gavel it out, and basically ignore the governor. In doing so, of course, they're ignoring Wisconsin voters who are paying them to get things done. For example, get chemicals, industrial chemicals, out of our drinking water. We have over the years been discovering the many different ways that an entire class of industrial chemicals known by PFAS, PFAS, which is an acronym for a very long chemical name. These chemicals are used in things like, waterproofing, Scotchgard for fabric, for nonstick, Teflon type coating, firefighting foam, a whole host of products. Along the way, these chemicals found their way into the ground and then into the groundwater. And now we're learning more and more about the chemicals and that some of them do have a negative effect on human health. They're called forever chemicals because they don't break down easily. They're man-made chemicals. They're not designed to break down by just the products I told you about. You can tell they're designed to be durable. So they've made it in the groundwater supply, and that's caused issues and expensive issues to remediate these areas, to test, to monitor. And frankly, if some of the people and companies dumping them are still around, they should have to help pay for some of this cost. Don't you agree? Well, the legislature in their budget passed $125 million to clean these things up. Now, stop me if you've heard this before. Well, no, don't, because we're going to say it again and again. What Republicans have done with the budget is they've budgeted a total amount. And in normal times, when the budget is passed, the legislature's work is done. It then goes to the executive branch, where the agencies there, like the DNR, figure out from that pot how they're going to spend that money to address whatever it is in the budget the money is designed for. But this legislature is saying, oh, no, we're not going to release the money. You have to come back to us with each individual request and say, Mother, may I? Which is not workable, and also a way for the legislature to essentially not spend the money that they claim they're going to be spending. And that's what they're doing right now. Not a dime of that $125 million has gone toward any kind of cleanup or enforcement or anything like that. So Governor Evers yesterday said, well, rather than call the whole legislature into special session, he's calling the legislature's Joint Finance Committee into session, because it's the Joint Finance Committee that draws up the budget for the legislature, made up of reps from the Assembly and senators from the Senate. That's the group that's the holdup. So he's just calling that committee into special session. Democratic Senator Kelda Royce from Madison is a member of that committee. And I asked her, here's a little snippet of our discussion. I asked her, what is the main obstacle Republicans are putting up to taking PFAS contamination seriously?
The most significant sticking point is that Republicans refused to take a provision out of their legislation that would basically prevent the DNR from being able to handle future pollution, future contamination. And in my view, the reason we have a DNR is so that they can help when there's a crisis, right? They can respond, they can promulgate rules, they can help protect us from pollution. So Republicans wanted to basically put that poison pill in it, and they weren't, there isn't necessarily a dispute about where the money should go. It's about whether or not we should use that as a vehicle to get this poison pill passed to kneecap the DNR.
The folks that you work with and serve with there talk about law and order and backing the blue and everything like that, and talking about backing law enforcement. What does it say when Republicans don't want to back law enforcement when it comes to our natural resources, in fact, would like to impede that kind of law enforcement for our natural resources?
It says that they want to obstruct justice, people who are victims of pollution.
The Republicans will say, that they of course would rather insult the DNR and say they're going to punish innocent landowners who had nothing to do with the actual pollution. Do you see validity in that point, or do you see safeguards that are built in?
No, I think that is a red herring of an argument, and it's just meant to distract people from the fact that year after year, Republicans promise they're going to do something, and then year after year, they use the complicated mechanisms of, these institutions that they have power hold on, like the legislature, to stop any progress from happening. They take holy pictures, they pretend like they've done something good, and then they block it from actually being enforced. That's their pattern of behavior.
That's Senator Calderoy's talking to her late yesterday. But in fact, she or somebody affiliated with her put up a video snippet on social media from nearly a year ago of her warning that this was likely to happen, that if Republicans kept language in the budget the way that it is, they could do exactly what they're doing now. So again, they're saying, we're not going to release this to the DNR unless Governor Evers signs this bill we're passing that essentially, hamstrings the DNR and prevents enforcement. Again, under the guise of, well, the DNR will force people to clean things up on their land, even though they're the victims, they didn't dump it. But those safeguards are already in there. And this looks much more like a case of, as the senator is saying, a head fake of saying, oh, we're going to solve this problem, but then in fact not solve the problem in order to protect industry, to protect the polluters, to protect an entire class that should not have to pay, in their view. The DNR, the state taxpayers, should have to pay for cleanup as much as possible. So the money, again, has not been allocated one bit. And you look at something like in Wausau, where Mayor Katie Rosenberg had to, be extremely aggressive in finding funding sources for water treatment there. The expense of that may very well have cost her the election last week, especially with a legislature dominated by Republicans that is not doing their share to help local governments with the cost, help landowners, help taxpayers recover the cost from the people who do the polluting. That's where the legislature needs to come back into session, or at least the Joint Finance Committee. The governor's called them to come back in Tuesday of next week. So we will watch and see if they, again, try to take this seriously, or if they continue to play politics in order to protect polluters and prevent any cleanup from happening. Coming up next, Melissa Baldoff is going to join us for our weekly climate check. We're going to talk about the transition from coal to renewable and what some of those transitions, some of the challenges of them, and what they can do to our air quality in the meantime, where things are a little better, but not as good as they could be. It's coming up next. You're Up North. We are back on Up North News Radio with this week's Climate Check with Melissa Baldoff. A couple of subjects to cover. One is actually a follow-up from a story that we did in Hometown Health over a year ago. And both of our stories this week involve natural gas fueled power plants and what's their role in a transition from, say, coal to much cleaner, greener, renewable forms of energy. Melissa, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you. All right, so let's start up in Superior, where there has been a lot of, well, I guess contention, a lot of contentious debate about whether to put a natural gas plant called the Namaji Trail Energy Center near a river in an industrial area of Superior. There were a lot of people that were for it at first, thinking that it was some kind of a bridge technology or fail safe. But as more people looked at the potential impact, maybe not so much. Maybe the support is starting to get reduced from there. Is that kind of a fair summation of what they're dealing with in Superior these days?
Yeah, I do think that is. And, I do. And the other thing I would say too is that, we talked, just recently about, some of the, threats we're seeing to our climate progress coming from local communities that want to stand in the way of progress. But here is an area in a situation where the residents in the area, including tribal leaders, health professionals, and others, um, really were able to, kind of turn the tide here and set things in the right direction, and to get their city council on board with doing the right thing and to vote against having another public hearing, and to move ahead with their recommendation to you know not allow this plant to come in and you know pollute the community and contribute to some really dangerous potential health outcomes
Well,
and environmental outcomes too.
that's where I'm definitely sympathetic to all the parties involved in this, because this is a tricky transition. You're talking about getting away from coal-fired power plants, which are much dirtier, put much more pollution into the atmosphere. But if your community is not exactly ready to go all solar, all wind, all renewable, then is natural gas, a power plant like that, is that a natural next step? But then you run into the trap that, well, we've got this new plant, we may as well keep using it. And so the transition to greener energy sources lasts longer than it should. There's in my mind, there's room for a little bit of sympathy on all sides as far as what's best for your community. And I think it comes down to two questions, Melissa. One is it really needed? And then second, if it is needed, does it happen to be located in a bad place from an environmental standpoint? Let's go with the first one first, as I, again, try to express that I hear what both sides are saying. That's a challenge I'm sure other communities are facing as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There is unfortunately not just a, switch to flip and then we can just have all clean energy all the time everywhere. There is that need for a transition. But the thing that we have heard from, advocates and people working in this field, we've heard them say this over and over and over again. It has to be a just transition. It has to be one that is going to ensure that we are doing the least amount of harm to impacted communities, people who have historically been hit the worst and the hardest. We have to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to participate in the success and the wins of the clean energy economy. And I think that's a big part of what the conversations are in communities is how are we going to do this in a way that is going to be good for everybody and is going to be a win for everybody.
And what also adds a different wrinkle to this is when you get what we would call odd bedfellows in politics. So you have the Northwest Wisconsin building trades, which would be looking at all kinds of construction jobs to put this up. And you've got Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers funded fossil fuel burners. And in this case, both of those groups would like to see this plant built. And then you have, folks who are much more environmentally conscious, sitting on the other side of this. Then to add another wrinkle to it, Melissa, we've got the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, who are saying, wait a minute, we were not consulted on this. Not only is it about 300 feet from a bend in the Nemadji River, it's about 500 feet or so from a burial site containing the remains of Lake Superior Ojibwe people. And so the whole thing is so complex right now. And I again got to say, I don't know where they go from here except to continue talking with one another about those two big questions. Is it needed? Is it needed in this form? Maybe. And again, the property, and the property, by the way, gets to a point that you've been making repeatedly when it comes to, climate change, that a lot of these things that, are like power plants, things that, have high emissions to them, are typically located like in an industrial area where who lives there? Lower income folks, communities of color. They're the ones that would be most impacted by, according to one study here, 2.7 million tons of carbon emissions a year from the plant as it's designed right now.
Exactly. And, I think that, like you said, is this something that is needed? Is it, needed in this exact space? Or is there more opportunity? And it seems like the Superior City Council agrees that there is some more opportunity to take a look at exactly what is needed and where, and hopefully explore, are there other options that can meet their energy needs, and still create some jobs and have a good, be at a good price for the consumers, but without as much pollution, without those potential health risks, and without, disrupting tribal burial grounds. So I think that there's definitely an opportunity to take a look, and I would say that's probably true for a lot of different communities as they think about that transition and making sure it's a just transition. Um, I'm sure that there are going to be communities where this maybe this kind of bridge step, like using natural gas, is going to absolutely have to be the answer. But I think that there are probably a lot of communities where they can meet those energy needs through, renewables and clean energy sources, energy efficiency. And I hope that that's something that people are really looking at, and not just assuming that they need to take this step to go to natural gas as they kind of wean off of coal power plants.
Oh, but wait, there's another wrinkle involved in this, and that is concern that if you're putting a shiny new power plant there, that it might lead to data centers, which is something we've talked about before. These data centers are just power hungry, mostly to keep all those servers cool. And cryptocurrency is extremely high energy use. And
Hmm.
again, I don't know that there's anything definitive there, except that there was talk that one of the potential partners in this project, is supported by others who lead them to think, might this be, something where a data center comes in next or crypto next? And now one is certainly necessary. Data centers are necessary. Crypto, not one of them, not so much. But again, we're going to need the data centers, but that doesn't mean we just plop them down wherever it's convenient.
Right. I agree. And, I have to say, there aren't too many problems that I look around Wisconsin and see and think, you know what we need here? Crypto. That's
No.
what would make this better.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, we should say that a lot of the info that we're talking about today comes from our friends over at Healthy Climate Wisconsin, healthyclimatewy.org. But also, I want to give a particular shout out to the Wisconsin Examiner and Isaiah Holmes, who wrote an exhaustive story on the struggle in Superior about where to put this plant. So I would highly recommend Isaiah's story in the Wisconsin Examiner, but also heading over to Healthy Climate Wisconsin and seeing the concerns there. Now we're going to pivot, because we're just going to keep following that story as it develops. But now we're going to pivot to another case where a natural gas power plant may be playing a negative role in local air quality. and that's in Beloit. And I don't know that you knew this when we set up the segment today. Again, hearing from the folks at Healthy Climate Wisconsin, but we had actually talked to folks from the Beloit area in February of last year, and they said they were just about to start a more intensive monitoring program of air emissions because they really thought that the air wasn't great quality around Beloit, but they didn't have the measurements to prove it. It appears, Melissa, they've taken those measurements and the numbers are not good.
They are not. It is really a grim headline from the Beloit area that a new World Air Quality Report names Beloit the most polluted regional city in the United States. So this is, a report that analyzed the particulate matter levels from more than 30,000 air monitors in nearly 8,000 cities around the globe. So this is, really, like I said, some grim news for Beloit. I do think on the one hand, it's a really remarkable effort by the, citizen scientists who really took the action to monitor and report air quality because they knew that there was something that was going on that was bad. I'm sure they were, our health professionals were seeing more poor outcomes, related to pollutants, and they wanted to kind of, make sure they started that dialogue about how to improve air quality with a number and knowing exactly how bad it is. Knowing it's bad isn't the same as knowing how bad something is. And you have to know how bad something is to actually be able to fix it. So, on the one hand, it's incredibly, encouraging to know that we have folks who want to work on this, like you said, our partners at Healthy Climate Wisconsin and other advocates. But they've got a lot of work to do in Beloit to address these really poor air quality issues.
Right. And again, they needed the numbers, they needed the data first. Here's one piece of data they did know going into this. Rock County is ranked 5th in the state for the rate of children hospitalized with asthma between 2019 and 2021. And yet, as we learned last year, the DNR was not actively monitoring particulate matter in the air. There was one sensor over on like the west side of town. And that's what led Healthy Climate Wisconsin to facilitate this monitoring program. 6 different monitors on loan from the EPA that take measurements every 10 minutes. And so now that they've got this data, one of the folks we had on last year is Pablo Torral, a professor of environmental studies at Beloit College. And he says, now you can look at the power plants, the factories, the vehicles. There's a recently converted coal to gas power plant, that is north of town, I believe. But again, you couldn't do any of this without the data. So this is not about pointing fingers. Well, I'll say it's not about pointing fingers yet, because people would say, well, how do you know? Now you know. Now you got that data, but you needed people that cared, like Brittany Keys. She's a physical therapist. She's a former Beloit City Council member. You need essentially what you said, citizen scientists willing to get involved.
Exactly. You need those citizen scientists. You need people who care about public health. And I would also be remiss if I didn't note, like you said, those incredibly poor outcomes for kids who are dealing with asthma, being hospitalized. And we're also seeing in the same area of the state really poor birth outcomes, especially for women and infants of color. And what an opportunity we have to address a bunch of these issues if we could only get the Republicans in Madison to agree to expand Medicaid.
Oh, Medicaid, and then also stop trying to, hamstring the Department of Natural Resources when they're trying to enforce things that would keep our natural resources healthier. Melissa Baldoff, thank you so much. We covered 2 important stories, ones that we definitely have to continue to monitor and follow up. Thanks, Melissa. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Today's history lesson is next. You're up north. How's Melissa?
I'm good. How are
I
you
don't
guys?
know. Ask her yourself. Oh, hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Hi, Greg.
Hello.
Right. Put that in there. Ah. $30 seconds. You got any other plays you're going to be in this year? Or was that your taste of theater for a while?
Well, that was probably all I can manage for right now.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a lot out of a person.
I did 4 plays in a year once, and then I never did theater again. I was like, I can't do this.
And you've spent the rest of your life recovering.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh, there's so much noise. Theater people. Well,
Here we go.
all right.
You may scream now. Yeah, just like that. I don't know how Katrina Leskinich of Katrina and the Waves didn't have more hits. That's such a nice little feel-good, bebopper from the late 80s. Katrina turned 64 years old today on today's list of birthdays and musical history and actual history and things you didn't learn in school. Or maybe Melissa Kay did when she was attending all that time ago. Melissa,
I
how
learned
are
this
you?
song from Secret to My Success with Michael J. Fox.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I love that movie. So many weird, not great,
Yeah,
today's scenes, but still.
It doesn't hold up
I
in
mean,
all those things, but
That's a deep cut. I'd
Yeah.
long forgotten about that movie.
I saw that movie in the theaters.
whoa.
Yeah.
What was
I
the
had it recorded on a VHS tape. Shh,
similarly?
don't tell anybody.
Michael J. Fox was in another one with Joan Jett, I believe it was.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a
It
song
wasn't-
together. Was it Break of Day or?
Yeah, I think it was break. Hold on, I'm gonna look it up.
Okay,
You
he's gonna
talk.
look that up while we get into. Speaking of '80s, we mentioned Brian Setzer earlier from the Stray Cats. He is
Light of Day.
Light of Day. Thank you, Brian Setzer, 65 years old today.
Doing all this stuff now.
Got a lot of birthdays and birth anniversaries today. NFL great John Madden was born this day in 1936. He passed away in 2021. Singer and actor Mandy Moore is 40 years old today. Singer Maren Morris is 34. Actor Daisy Ridley from Star Wars is 32 years old today. And today is the 65th birthday, not just of Brian Setzer, but also born that same day, Kenneth Babyface Edmonds. And we're going to play a little Eric Clapton in the background simply because you hear Babyface in the background as well on guitar and backing vocals.
By
Now-
not getting vaccinated.
Now, you may not have a lot of Babyface in your collection, you think. As co-founder of LaFace Records with L.A. Reid, the things that he wrote and produced, groups like TLC, Usher, Tony Braxton. He wrote The Whispers, Rocksteady, Boys to Men's End of the Road, and I'll Make Love to You, the Exhale Shoop Shoop song for Whitney Houston.
Just the
He-
way you're saying it.
He just produced for so many. Stop being so suburban over there, you.
Exhale, shoop, shoop, shoop. I'll make love to you. And this stunning classic, Change the World by Eric Clapton. He's become a piece of trash lately. I'm so disappointed
I
in
feel
Eric
like
Clapton.
you're my what are you, my youth translator over here?
Yes, I am, as I stroke my gray beard. If I'm your youth translator, you're in trouble, sir.
Yeah.
You
I
just
hear
listed off my high school playlist.
See? And that
I
was
hear
all.
Pat Kreitlow's got the Riz.
Don't do
Just
that.
like
that
Quick
word.
Trip's chicken.
That word.
Oh, yeah.
No.
I saw
no.
that. I'm like, come on. All right, that's officially dead.
It's
Riz
got-
is gone. It's
Yep.
done.
This was an ill-fated day for the Titanic, which began
Why?
its maiden voyage today in 1912. Yeah, things didn't work out well for them. Let's see. Number one on the album chart this day in 1976 was the juggernaut album Frampton Comes Alive by Peter Frampton. Hey, this was high technology back in the day.
I mean, it's a talk box.
That's a voice box, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called a talk box. So what happens is you put a rubber tube in your mouth, and as you're playing, you sing the notes you're playing, and that's how that tone is.
I was in a band for a few years called Checkered Past, and one of the guitar players had that, and the tube was so disgusting. Like, I can't believe you're putting that in your mouth.
So, Pat, I'm going to ask you a really super quick question here,
Yes, sir.
and I'm going to employ the fact that you were
Old. Go ahead.
You were around, and how old were you when this album came out?
I would have been 12 years old.
How big was this record?
Oh, my! I had to hold back trying to state how big this record was at the time. I mean, and it was the thing until the next year when Fleetwood Mac's Rumors came out.
Oh my God!
But these were albums that everybody had. The tunes were on radio everywhere. I'm sure on Z100 here in Eau Claire, on the old KDWB AM in the Twin Cities. Who was the rocker back then? WOKY in Milwaukee. Oh yeah, playing nothing but Frampton.
93 QFM probably was the one here in Milwaukee or in this area. I remember there was a joke in Wayne's World where she's showing him records. She's like, "I got Frampton Comes Alive." He's like, "So what? Everyone has that. If you lived in the suburbs, they sent you that album like samples of Tide."
That reminds me, the old man said we should actually do one of these days a show or a segment dedicated to some of those old AM rocker stations around Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
You know who they were and some of the old boss DJs they used to tell them. Anyway, on this day in 1970, Paul McCartney announced that he was leaving the Beatles. Elton John's self-titled album was released this day in 1970, which included the tune Your Song. On the national calendar today, Melissa, today is National Hug Your Dog Day.
Aww.
It's National Siblings Day. Notice how it doesn't say hug your siblings. You can hug your dog, yeah, siblings. Encourage a Young Writer Day. It's Global Work From Home Day. Check. It's National Golfers Day, National Bookmobile Day, National Farm Animals Day, National Safety Pin Day. Yeah, somebody thought to have a day dedicated to the safety pin.
Safety pin? I mean, it was very innovative for its time.
That's what they're saying. It's, much like the talk box. It was innovative. For
No!
its time.
Safety pins are far more useful.
I
Well,
want to get a
yes.
talk box for the studio. I'd be like, "Good morning, Matt."
Yeah, well, now we've got the whole auto-tune thing. Do you believe?
You don't need it. You can just do it with your voice, Greg.
What is happening at Locally Grown Radio?
Oh, we had an exciting day yesterday. Our CEO, Sage, came and visited us with Aaron also to talk about changes coming for our WIRI station and some potential ones as well for WFHR. So we've got exciting things happening, but on our they're going to be talking about campfire cooking on Friday during a midday magazine with some of our local Historic Point boss people. And I don't know, do you guys like to cook over a campfire?
I did once upon a time when I was younger, like in a Boy Scout troop, but I haven't for the longest time.
I love it when Grubhub gets there to my campfire. It's great.
Melissa Kay, thank you so much.
Yes, always good to see you
day.
guys.
Yep, we'll see you next week. Coming up in our next hour, former DC police officer Michael Fanone on trying to stem the violent rhetoric in political speech these days, and Congressman Mark Pocan, all in our next hour on Up North News Radio on this Wednesday morning. You're Up North. And we're clear. Melissa, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys. See you later.
Great day. Bye.
You too.
How's Brittany today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You have a nice trip back home?
I did.
Good.
Construction is a little rough, though.
Hey, I've got a taped interview that I've got to start by 7:09 here, so we'll be a little abbreviated today.
Perfect, because there's nothing going on.
Yeah, nothing. All's quiet.
All across Wisconsin from Civic Media, this is Up North News Radio. Now, live from our Lake Wissota studio, here's the founding editor of Up North News, Pat Brightlow.
Back here at 7:06 on this Wednesday morning, April 10th. Weather coming up in just a second. That'll be followed by my interview with retired D.C. police officer Michael Fanone, one of the many law enforcement officers attacked and beaten in that insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. We'll hear from him in just a minute. First, meteorologist Brittany Merlot joins us. Also, a good morning from Rob out in Tigerton. Says it's sunshine and 41. He's officially a National Weather Service spotter for a third year in a row after taking the Storm Spotter class. And he wants to say happy birthday to his friend Rachel, owner of Rachel's Roadside Bar and Grill in Wittenberg. So happy birthday, Rachel.
Happy birthday.
Brittany, things look really nice out there, but I believe we've got there's weather on the doorstep.
Right. There's always a price to pay. You can't get this nice. You can't have temperatures 20 degrees now above our average highs for this time of year. We're going to be soaring into the upper 60s to 70s today. Abundant sunshine up until about lunch. After lunch, some clouds are going to start to roll in. It's going to get overcast for tomorrow. And yes, rain is striking. We are looking at anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch from central Wisconsin all the way over to Lake Michigan as well. So a damp and dreary day tomorrow. But for today, bright, beautiful, and warm. Can't complain.
But then the long range looks especially warm.
Yes, the weekend. Oh my goodness, we could be hitting 80s by Sunday and into Monday. So spring is here, everybody. Have a smile on your face.
Consider us.
Wait for people to be like, it's too hot.
It's too hot. Oh, no.
Yep,
No.
here we go.
Nobody gets to do that the first time around. All right, Brittany, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You. You too.
On Monday evening, when he first came into Wisconsin, I had a chance to talk with a retired D.C. police officer, Michael Fanone, who has testified before the January 6th committee about what happened that day when he and many other law enforcement officers were attacked at the Capitol. And he puts the blame squarely, where it belongs, on violent rhetoric from former President Donald Trump. And the violent rhetoric, he says, that is encouraging other people to violence. So he's on a speaking tour essentially telling people to take it down a notch. He's with the group Courage for America, and I asked him what it is about Courage for America that's helping organize appearances by him and other law enforcement officers around the country.
Yeah, so Courage for America is an organization that I got involved with shortly after January 6, 2021. It's an organization made up of average, everyday Americans who either professionally or in their personal lives, or in some cases both, were adversely affected by political violence and violent political rhetoric.
And what do you want to tell folks in Wisconsin and elsewhere? Do you have a target audience of people that you really want to hear your message?
Yeah, anyone who is either indifferent about the events that occurred at our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, or those who may have bought into some of the misinformation and disinformation surrounding the events at the Capitol. As you know, some of your listeners may not, I was a DC police officer. I was served in that capacity for 2 decades. And on January 6, 2021, myself and hundreds of my colleagues responded to calls for assistance from the U.S. Capitol Police after their perimeters had been breached by a violent mob. As a result of my response, I was severely beaten. I was struck with a taser device numerous times. I suffered a heart attack and a traumatic brain injury. And there were more than 140 law enforcement officers that were injured that day, some severely, many resulting in the end of their careers. So I want to educate people as to what actually happened that day using my experience. I want to talk to local residents, community leaders, students about the type of people that they send to represent them in Congress. You know, our organization is non-political, we're nonpartisan, and we want to bring attention to individuals in Congress, people like Representative Derek Van Orden here from La Crosse, who actually participated in the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. An attack that, like I said, resulted in the serious injury of hundreds of career law enforcement officers. And I want people to think long and hard about who it is that they're sending to Congress and what type of individuals are representing them. And is this the climate and the culture that we want for future generations in this country? Individuals who feel free to use rhetoric that inspires their fellow Americans to commit acts of violence.
There are still elected officials among us, including the new Speaker of the House, including our senior Senator Ron Johnson, who still try to characterize the events of that day as, tourists gone wild or something similarly moderate. We're not going to talk about them or what you would say to them, but to people who hear them, what do you think they need to hear from you to stop thinking that these are elected officials who can be trusted when they describe January 6th in that way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's just for many in Congress and in politics today, January 6th is politically inconvenient. I mean, the reality is that hundreds, thousands of Americans were inspired by lies about the results of the 2020 election. And those lies coming from, elected leaders, people who are in positions of authority, inspired them to commit these acts of violence. And so, what you have now is these leaders who continue to use the same rhetoric that inspired Americans to attack other Americans on January 6th, simply because it's politically advantageous and they want to remain in office.
Let's talk about a couple of those here in Wisconsin. We've talked at length about Congressman Van Orden's role on the Capitol grounds that day, but there were people who were in Congress at the time, including Congressman Tom Tiffany from up here in northern Wisconsin, and we've talked about Senator Ron Johnson previously. But when we talk about somebody like Congressman Tiffany, who has voted to overturn some of the state's election results from 2020. Somebody who signed on to an amicus brief in a Texas lawsuit designed to invalidate the will of the voters of Wisconsin and other swing states. To know that those are elected officials who not only are still in office, but quite likely, based on their district, have a more than fair chance of being reelected. Do you feel like there are still things you can say to their constituents that might give them pause between now and November?
I mean, I can only speak as a fellow American. I'm somebody who, prior to, I would say the 2016 election was what I would describe as apolitical. I supported candidates on both sides of the aisle. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And what I would say to them is that, those 140 some odd members of Congress who voted against certifying the 2020 election did so knowing that there was no evidence to support those claims. It was pure politics. And we've learned this now, or I've learned it since, having listened to the select committee's investigation in Congress, a bipartisan group of members who spent quite a bit of time in investigating what led up to the attack on our Capitol on January 6th. And so the fact that these individuals lied to their constituents, lied to their fellow Americans, inspired their constituents to attack the Capitol, many of whom are now serving lengthy prison terms simply because they thought they were fulfilling their patriotic duty because they were told that the election had been stolen. Not by, their buddy at their local bar, but by their elected representatives in Congress. Again, people who hold positions of authority, who at least, should be seen as credible sources of information. And, to me, those individuals are even more responsible for the action or the violence on January 6th than the individuals who committed the acts themselves.
That's retired D.C. police officer Michael Fanone. We will have part 2 of my conversation with him in just a moment. I just wanted to take a moment again to underscore what we were just saying there, that people like Congressman Tom Tiffany and people like Congressman Scott Fitzgerald, who voted against certifying the correct vote totals from a couple of different states, and in Tiffany's case, signing on to that Texas lawsuit that sought to overturn the will of Wisconsin voters, that those un-American acts rendered them not deserving of a seat in Congress. They should have resigned with honor immediately. And they have not. And they have continued to spread doubts. They've continued to spread the big lie that Donald Trump is telling. Trump, again, in the past couple of days, brought up the lie that he somehow won in Wisconsin. He did not. And his violent rhetoric is only making things worse. And we'll hear more from Officer Michael Fanone about that in just a moment. Wherever you're listening across Wisconsin on this Wednesday morning, when you're here, you're up north, live from Lake Wissota on the Civic Media Radio Network. We are going to be visiting live with Congressman Mark Pocan in just about 15 minutes. But first, we're going to continue our conversation with retired D.C. officer Michael Fanone, who's on a speaking tour, including stops in Wisconsin, about taking down a notch the political rhetoric, which is including far too much violent imagery and, frankly, casts fellow Americans as evil rather than people who can disagree on political matters. So I start this part of the interview with asking how he's coming to terms with how norms have been smashed in this country when it comes to today's political rhetoric. Let's look at this year then, this campaign with Donald Trump running again and having the support that he does, and what you would like to see in terms of the national discourse. Because it's one thing for Republicans to speak out against political violence once it's already happened. But we seem to have a whole lot of people in one political class that say, well, there's really no need to speak out preemptively about, future violence. So what I want to ask you is there harm in having anything other than a zero tolerance policy on violent rhetoric in political speech this year?
I mean, that's how it should be every year. The fact that we even have to have this conversation is, an unfortunate sign of the times. But I mean, yes, it should be a zero tolerance policy, and for decades it was. A lot of the behavior that we see, carried out in Congress today, 10 or 15 years ago would have gotten you censured and stripped of your committee assignments and most likely run out of Congress, if not officially, you would have lost the support of your party and any financial backing and simply would have been impossible to seek re-election. And now it's it's a valued commodity within it, at least one of our major political parties. It results in millions of dollars of fundraising, media attention, and
it just seems to be an accepted way of doing business now, of doing political business. We don't want to think that it's something that would be tolerated in a nice Midwestern state like Wisconsin, but there have been at least 11 men from Wisconsin charged, some convicted, and it could easily be argued that others on the Capitol grounds may have gotten away without being charged. But from what's happened over the past 3+ years, do you believe we're in a place where fewer people from Wisconsin would engage in some similar act against their government? Or are we in an age now where if these circumstances came together again, there might be more than 11 people from Wisconsin who would answer that call and engage potentially in some form of political violence?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's the latter. Despite some of the lengthy prison sentences handed down to individuals that attacked the Capitol, I don't believe that that will serve as a deterrent to everyone. And so I think that because of how divided we are at this point in the country, because of how we seemingly cannot trust individuals who may have a viewpoint that's different or differing from ours, and how we seem to have two completely different versions of the truth. I think, I believe that, we will see more violence to come, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming presidential election.
So to take this to where we would want it to go, ideally in 2024, there are a lot of people who are looking at the lay of the land here these days and may be tempted to unplug or stay unplugged if they've never voted before. voting as an act of citizenship. What would you say to folks who would hear what you say and sound sympathetic, but say, I just don't know, so I'm not going to vote. Let whatever's going to happen. What would you tell somebody like that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, if you care about democracy, if you care about freedom, if you're deeply patriotic like I am, then you have to recognize that we, the people, the voters, are ultimately the last line of defense. We can't look to these institutions like our criminal justice system to protect us from people who would exploit our democracy for their own personal gain and personal benefit. Accountability, at least in some part, is going to have to begin at the ballot box with free and fair elections.
Then to sum things up here, you have 4 daughters. I have 2 daughters, and we're both so focused on the kind of world we want to leave them. Is there a best case scenario in your head? Is there something that gives you signs of optimism that they will someday only have to look back on this as a terrible but temporary historical anomaly? Do you have reason for that kind of hope?
And I mean, in some ways I do, and in some ways, I mean, this is the way I explained it to them. I'm going to fight like hell to ensure that they still live in a democracy, and they're going to have to fulfill their obligation to ensure that it stays that way. But most likely, I think that they're going to, their generation will face, its own test as to, the strength of our democracy, and they're going to have to, to rise to the occasion, just like you and I are going to have to rise to the occasion right now.
Yeah, citizenship is no longer something to take for granted, meaning our responsibilities as a citizen. Michael Fanone, his book is called Hold the Line, The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for the America's Soul. He is touring with Courage for America across Wisconsin and other states. And officer, we are very thankful that you chose to spend some time with us at Up North News Radio. Safe travels. Thank you so much for your service. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
It really was, a privilege to be able to talk to him because, again, sometimes, and Greg, this, the rhetoric gets to a point, it gets heated. We now use sports and or war analogies, far too often. And as we saw on January 6th, there's a very human toll in that I'm glad somebody's reminding us to really be more mindful of what we say.
Absolutely. I mean, especially doing the work we do here, it's easy in our bubble to read the information, to get fired up and heated. And then we have to remind ourselves that we're on the radio talking to people, and there are people out there who disagree with us, and we want them to hear the message, and getting fiery doesn't help.
Congressman Mark Pocan is next. You're Up North. Hey, Congressman, how are you?
Hey, very good, Pat. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Let's see, just pushing some buttons here, and there we go. Yeah, so this is our 5-minute break. So what I'll do is I'll tuck you back in the waiting room so that you can make all the noise you want for the next 4 minutes or so. I don't know if you'd heard or seen, but we just finished a taped interview with Officer Fanone. And so I'm just going to come right out of that. He's on a speaking tour around Wisconsin, basically speaking out against violent political rhetoric. Take it down a notch.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'll start with you as well, as far as the tone, what people say, and then we'll talk about Marjorie. Or the other people who are making your life so interesting right now.
Yes.
So, anything in particular you're working on you want to emphasize today?
The only thing is we just did this letter with 56 members of Congress.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
It's probably helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, sounds good. Back in about 3.5 minutes. I'll come get you in 3 minutes.
Sounds good, Pat. Thank you.
You bet. All right, we'll get going in a few seconds here.
Sounds good.
When there ain't a crack in the foundation, baby, I know when it's gone, when peace and we'll go right over while we stay put. The house don't fall when my bones are good.
Marin Morris, one of today's birthdays. You can catch it in our history lesson every morning about 6:50. Whipping around on Up North News sites elsewhere on social media. On our Facebook page, you can find a post about how 5 Big Ten schools, of course including Wisconsin, have landed on Business Insider's list of the 25 most intense schools, places where academics and extracurriculars have equal focus. In our newsletter today, more about President Biden's 2025 budget priorities for working families as opposed to tax breaks for the wealthy. And on our website, my story about the race for Congress in the 8th Congressional District, where Republican Tony Weed got Donald Trump's endorsement before he even announced. And Trump also took a shot at one of the other Republicans running in the 8th District, and nobody ever thought that state Senate President Roger Roth would be referred to as a rhino. But that is the era that we live in these days, and we'll talk more about that now with Congressman Mark Pocan, who joins us this morning. Now. Congressman, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Pat. Well, thank you.
Let me, before we get to the 8th District race and everything else happening, I want to come back from the interview we just finished with Officer Fanone. Again, one of those who was badly beaten at the Capitol and is now speaking out about violent rhetoric. And it feels like the kind of thing that a lot of us have been talking about since 2015, when Trump was talking about, throwing people out of his rallies and go ahead and hit them and everything else. And it's only gotten worse. And I feel like, on the one hand, it's kind of vindication for what we've been saying all along. But I'm sure you'd agree, we collectively still have a long ways to go.
A lot more to go. The Trump era certainly did bring up more of this, but then, some of these new people in Congress that have come in through the MAGA movement, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Chip Roy, and others, are just really, that's what they're here for, is to do that. They think that somehow being popular in that movement and that kind of rhetoric is why they're in Congress, not to pass bills, not to pass laws, not to make people's lives better. And, that's the problem. So then, we hear it even back in our districts from some folks. And, it's a tone that you're losing a lot of good people in Congress. Pat, I think I'm kind of crazy that I'm sticking around in this. A lot of people are like, why? Why would I put my family through this? Why would I do this? When, especially this Congress, we never worked so hard to get so little done. And then to have that on top of it, does make it a lot harder to attract, I think, the kind of people that we want to attract to Congress, people who really, represent their communities and just want to do the best for their neighbors rather than, be a national political figure.
I couldn't agree more. And it takes you from the federal level, which would include Mike Gallagher saying, that's it, I'm out, to State Senator Rob Coles, who, I served with him in the legislature. I think you might have as well, because he goes back a ways. And again, one of those Republicans that you could have a conversation with. You could disagree on things and yet still find some kind of compromise and work together. But I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I believe, 2 weeks ago or so, Senator Ron Johnson said something along the lines of, we're not here to pass bills. That just makes us Democratic light or something like that. And I thought, wow, if that doesn't encapsulate where an entire political party is right now, I don't know what else could.
People like that should, work for activists, nonprofit organizations, if that's what they want to do, because it's not, and I should say that because there's plenty of activists, nonprofit organizations that want to do good, but they shouldn't be in the elected halls of Congress. Our job is to get things done. Our job is to occasionally compromise. Our job is to get things, before each other's bodies so that we can actually pass legislation. We're not doing it this session. The full impact of Trump took a little while longer to move into Congress. But now even Appropriations Committee, where I was spoiled, we got things done all during the Trump years. This session, it all broke apart because Kevin McCarthy was so desperate to become speaker. He changed the rules and put a bunch of the extremists on the committee. And now we also don't function. So it is a tough era. And the same thing in Madison, as you well know, we're seeing it's got to turn around at some point. I really am a half glass full guy. I think when Donald Trump is out of the picture, I think we're in a much better place because there's no other national figure that has the same megaphone he does, because don't forget, he was an entertainer, Celebrity Apprentice. I think that really gave him, a lot more than others who come into that position. But I am worried.
Rightly so. In terms of trying to get things done, I mean, we have been talking now for more than 6 months about an aid package to Israel, an aid package to Ukraine, perhaps help to Taiwan, perhaps something for the southern border and other worthy things. And yet it keeps getting caught up in these threats of government shutdowns, in Republicans rebelling against their own speaker, and of course the course of the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza has certainly put the whole notion of aid package in a different light. Is there any way to give you that question as to where are we overall in moving some kind of aid packages to any of these particular hotspots?
Yeah, I think the one that I think most members of Congress, probably 3/4 of Congress, would vote for would be the Ukraine package. If it were able to get to the floor, because of the way they changed the rules on the Republican side, it's much harder to get to the floor. But we've got to figure out how to do that. I think there is at least half of the Republicans and virtually every single Democrat, including myself, would support that. I think the Israel funding is much more complicated. Benjamin Netanyahu, almost on a daily basis, is proving that his interests are not the U.S. interests, and we need a change of course, I think, from the United States. In looking at that, we have to, I think, condition some of that aid. I want to still support Israel as a friendly nation, but Benjamin Netanyahu has been an irresponsible host of those funds and not using them well. So I think we have to put some conditions to protect innocent lives of kids in particular in Gaza and Israel, for that matter. I mean, if this broadens, we get brought into it. And I think Netanyahu right now is just making a lot of assumptions. And then the humanitarian aid, for whatever reason, the Republicans don't believe in right now. And that's kind of crazy, because that's something that I think is a hallmark of what the United States is about. So we may have to break these into some pieces to finally get it done, or at least have some assurances from the White House on conditions. But there's a movement on the ground in Wisconsin, Pat. I mean, I did 4 town halls and a couple other meetings in my district when I was home for 2 weeks. We're rarely, as you know, home for 2 weeks in a row. I was shocked I was in my most rural parts of my district, not Madison. I think the closest I got was Mazomanie, Wisconsin, which is not, exactly Madison. Mm-hmm. And, the thing people wanted to talk about the most in these town halls was Ukraine and Gaza. And, Ukraine, they want to get it done. Gaza, they're really concerned about the direction.
Well, yes. And it bears stating again that you can want compassion and humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people, but not be pro-Hamas. And similarly in Israel, you can be disagreeable or downright disgusted with what the Netanyahu government is doing that does not make you anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. And the fact of the matter is that pivotal moment when Israel attacked those humanitarian workers with World Central Kitchen, that was a real pivot point for a lot of people in helping them understand that while they want to see humanitarian aid, they want to see, minimize death, they do want to see the defeat of terrorism, but there's something terribly wrong when humanitarian workers are purposefully targeted, as it appears.
Yeah, over 200 aid workers have been killed, and that's part of the problem. We can't get food and water to people, not only because Israel won't let it through its borders, so we're dropping it from the air and sometimes killing people doing that, and trying to bring it in from water, which is, again, ridiculous that we can't do it in a more safe and efficient way. But if the people who distribute it are also being killed and we can't get distributed, then you still have starvation. The way I look at it, I've been to the region 3 times. The people in Israel just don't want bombs raining on them from Gaza, from extremists, and there are extremists in Gaza. But at the same time, I think people in Palestine want to be treated with human rights and human dignity, and they're not. We can have a 2-state solution, which has been the long-standing U.S. position, and we should just double down on that, try to make something out of this bad be good, and that could be what maybe we should, be really fighting for. But right now, the tide has absolutely turned in public opinion, and I think we need the White House to really hear that as closely as possible.
And so as people look at what Congress might do with that aid package, and then again for Ukraine, which desperately needs it as well, it comes back to, the still new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, and trying to get a read on him. He keeps saying kind of the right things, like we're going to get something done for Ukraine, but you're still not really seeing it in his actions. And I honestly can't tell how much of it to put on him for his leadership skills or lack thereof versus he wants to do something good, but the extreme members in his caucus won't let him. What kind of a read do you get on the speaker these days?
It's a combination. I mean, their caucus with the small margin is completely dysfunctional, and that's why we only do censure resolutions, impeachments, disapprovals of Biden, things like that. We can't actually pass laws that we've been sent here to do. But also Johnson is very inexperienced, and I've been told by Republicans that he's trying to please everyone in his caucus. And if you look at that caucus, you can't. I mean, if you went to the Addams Family set, Cousin It and Morticia and Herman all might be a little different in trying to please. And that's what it's like with the Republican caucus right now. And he hasn't quite understood that yet.
So we look at what's there now, and we look at what might be there after November. And we've mentioned Congressman Gallagher is stepping down, and in the 8th CD, the 8th Congressional District, we know that obviously Kristen Lyerly got in the race on the Democratic side late last week. There were a former state senator, Roger Roth, former state Senate president, and a current senator, Andre Jacques, already in the race, when seemingly out of nowhere, out of left field, comes this former gas station owner, Tony Weed, and comes in immediately with the Trump endorsement. And so I just ask you, as an outsider looking at that district, is it in play for Democrats to pick up, especially if this primary becomes especially bruising, or did Trump just make the primary almost a non-event, and this Tony Weed guy is going to stroll right in? What's your prognostication on that?
Man, we got to see. I mean, I don't predict Republican primaries these days. It's difficult. We have an exceptionally strong candidate in the 8th district, but the numbers aren't as good as, say, the 3rd or the 1st, right? Democrat-Republican splits. But, this is definitely an interesting curveball thrown in with Donald Trump getting involved before a candidate's even announced. Someone like Roger Roth, I agree with you. Someone to call him a rhino is like very interesting. Certainly not by our standards. And, Andre Jacques, the same lane that he's trying to have is where this new candidate's at. So who knows what will happen? I just know that, I think we're going to have a very serious candidate coming to the 1st very, very soon. The 3rd district has several folks that are vying for the primary against the most damaged member of our delegation, Derek Van Orden. Wisconsin is going to be ground central with the U.S. Senate with Tammy Baldwin's seat. Obviously, the president has to win it, and we have new legislative maps. If you couldn't ask for more this November, you're certainly going to be having lots of abilities to, in a very positive way, influence government at the state and federal and local level.
And didn't you find it interesting that, again, President Biden was here in Wisconsin just 2 days ago, his 10th trip overall as president. And yet when Donald Trump finally came to Wisconsin, to Green Bay last week, it was on Election Day, and quite possibly cost conservatives the majority, because some of the Green Bay City Council members, lost by a handful of votes. It just goes to show that, Wisconsin's going to get attention, but you got to give it good attention. It's got to be productive. And if you feel like you're going to see that from the administration, from the national party and everything else, are they taking Wisconsin more seriously than maybe they did in cycles past?
Oh, absolutely. I remind them of the Hillary campaign over and over, that she never showed up, and we all warned them. This time we're trying to make sure we're in their ear on a regular basis. But, Joe Biden's come to Wisconsin so often. I was kidding that you guys, the governor, what the residency requirements are. He might owe some taxes, for being here. But that's good. He needs to be here. But I think he also needs to hear maybe what some of us are hearing on the ground. And I do think a turn in policy on Gaza would be the single most important thing for him to do in the coming months to really lock down the state completely.
Yeah, and then there was the focus of his trip this week, which we won't have time to get into, but in a future visit, I want to talk to you about student loan debt and outreach to young voters, especially in your district there. We have much to cover on the 3rd district in future visits as well. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much for making some time for us. Hope you have a great day out there.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. Take care.
All right. When we come back, Todd Alba of the conveniently named Todd Alba Show joins us to tell us what to expect this afternoon. That's coming up next here up north. Todd Alba Radio.
Patrick Kreitlow in the morning. There's Greg Bach.
Sorry.
I didn't mean it that way. It's a ray of sunshine.
There you go.
That's me.
10 seconds.
Thank you.
One more time.
Welcome back to Trader and Trapper. 3-for-1 drink specials going on now. But first, get out on that dance floor and say hi to your DJ, Todd Alba, everybody.
Good morning, Wisconsin.
DJ Todd Father.
That's right. See, we never now have a Todd appearance without our friend Tony Zimmerman up in Hayward area reminding us to respect the Todd Father. Also to remind us, the 7th Congressional District has a candidate in there, Kyle Kilborn, and that he, like others, are tired of this 24/7 election cycle where there's been no governing, which is precisely what Congressman Pocan was just talking about, Todd. There's no room for actual governing anymore. We certainly see that in Congress, and now we see it at the state legislature, where Governor Evers yesterday had to call a special session of a committee just to try to get something done. And even then, I think, would you agree Republicans are probably going to ignore this as well and keep all that PFAS cleanup money tied up, held hostage?
Yeah, they're not going anywhere. They're not coming back. I mean, I get what the governor is doing. You put people on record, and you can run on that. But is it actually going to do anything? No. I mean, Republicans will ignore this like every other special legislative session that the governor has called, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but I do think it's a great stark reminder to people about which party in Wisconsin is serious about governing and which one isn't. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But no, I would lay money that you will not see this committee come back into a special session, even if called by the governor.
Yeah, they're just, it appears, again, just from the press releases yesterday from Republicans and Democrats on joint finance, that they are still far apart, and that Republicans do not appear to be ready to budge in the way that they're looking to protect polluters. We're looking to protect industry, which, again, seems odd to me because the Republican Party I used to know was pro-business, but they were also pro-natural resources.
Yeah.
Now we're going way back for when that was the case, but it actually did exist that they say, okay, we support business, but not to the point where you're, peeing in the lake. We got to draw the line somewhere. And now they're like, no, dump away.
Well, you go, I mean, yeah, sure, back all the way back to Governor Warren Knowles, but you go not quite so far back to Tommy Thompson when he worked with Democrats and Republicans to create both the lower Wisconsin Riverway and the Mississippi corridor as well, protecting natural resources there. I know Bob Jouk from Superior, great Democrat, was very instrumental in the Mississippi River part of it, working with Republicans. So, yeah, I mean, it certainly happened in the past, but I think, to Congressman Pocan's point, to listen to the interview, thought it was good. And, people, your point about U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, that Republicans just don't see themselves as legislators anymore. They simply see them there as extensions of Donald Trump. And I know, I tweeted earlier this week about Wisconsin State Senator Rob Coles of Green Bay, and obviously he's not going to seek for re-election. People forget Rob Coles. He started his career as a Democrat, and actually very concerned about the environment, very concerned about conservation. Worked on a lot of great conservation bills over the course of his tenure. Have I always agreed with him? No, I can't think of a legislator, including those for which I worked, that I always agreed with. But I think it's a sad day in the state Senate, in the state legislature, to lose your longest-serving member. All the institutional knowledge is gone. And also just one of, if not the last Republican who is willing to at least sit down and listen. We had Matt Rothschild yesterday, who is not a conservative Republican, call in and agree and said, Rob Coles is one of the last people that we could actually have conversations with and work together. And losing him is a loss for Wisconsin.
Let's turn to something a little more positive, actually a lot more positive. And that is a very public on-air thank you to you, Todd Alba, for the trip that you and Trigvi did around the state last week, where the center point of it, the centering message of it was what's great about Wisconsin, and not said in a sarcastic way. What's so great about Wisconsin? Like, no, seriously, what's great about Wisconsin? And listening to you and Trigvi Olson at the after hours event in your Eau Claire stop and listening to you on your show throughout was that thing that we needed most, and that is to set the disagreements aside for a moment and recenter ourselves. And why do we all love living, playing, working, and serving here?
Yeah, well, thanks, Pat, and thank you for being a large part of it, particularly, Claire, you were on the show while we were at UW Eau Claire, and really of the 5 days, Richland Center, La Crosse, Eau Claire, Stevens Point, and Green Bay, I think the most feedback we got from listeners and viewers was our time in Eau Claire and Chancellor Jim Schmidt, and just being a positive cheerleader. I had friends who have kids getting ready to go to college, a couple of whom texted and said, "Wow, after listening to that Chancellor Schmidt guy in Eau Claire, we might send our kid there." And I think you're right, Pat. And I was actually talking to our former colleague, our friend Kristen Bry, last night a little bit, and she said, "So what'd you learn? What'd you learn?" I said, "Well, one of the big takeaways is people are really tired of just constant witching, griping to clean it up for radio, and they, I mean, and I know it's a little hokey, I know it's low hanging fruit. People are yearning for somebody like Tommy Thompson. I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican that just says, you know what, Minnesota says they have 15,000 lakes, or 10,000 lakes, we have 15,000, and ours have fish in them. It's where people want to be happy to be Wisconsinites. People, the bartenders, we didn't sit there and talk about Trump or Biden. We talked about the Brewers. And I think that people are really yearning for politicians, leaders who don't totally ignore problems, but let's focus on the good things that bring us together and being happy that we're Wisconsinites. So thank you for being a large part of that.
I appreciate that. And about Tommy Thompson. When he first got elected, when he defeated Tony Earl, he had a reputation. He was known as Dr. No, because he would say no to everything that Democrats put out there. He was seen as being particularly hard-headed that way. But here's a guy that got elected governor and then matured in his leadership, which I feel like the opposite is happening today. That as people rise in the ranks, they're getting more hard-headed. There's more money involved, obviously. The stakes are higher. And so we need those reminders now and then that there are people who grow into an office when they're there. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, thank you. And let me just say quickly, because I heard you mention with Mark Pocan, Kristen Lyerly in the 8th. Trivy Olson is a guy who has worked on presidential campaigns like John McCain's and others. He knows Republican politics better than anybody else I know. He spent, a half an hour with Dr. Lyerly when we interviewed her in Green Bay. We got off the air and he looked at me and said, she could win. And that's not hyperbole. That's not just saying that because she was there. He was so impressed with her message. And there's somebody, Dr. Lyerly in Green Bay, who has a positive message, who is a great speaker, who's genuine. That's the kind of candidates we need to run this year.
Certainly do. Todd, thank you so much. Have a great show this afternoon.
Thank
Greg,
you, guys.
Thank you as well, Greg. Up North News is the Wisconsin digital outlet for Courier, a pro-democracy news network, building a more informed, engaged, and representative America. I'm Pat Kreitlow. Have a great day. See you tomorrow morning.